All right, this was also a very big hot topic, right? Very big hot topic. Asia Games, for those who don't know, Asian Games is basically like the Olympic version of within Asia, and it's a very big deal for Korea in particular, right? Because League of Legends is involved, esports is involved, and it offers, just because it's a medaled event, it offers military exemption. This was also, of course, a central point of the whole ruler saga because, people that are military exempt are, it's, expected that you have sublime conduct, especially because there's even more immense pressures on you because culturally, obviously, the military and, the country's history, there's great pride in the nation. And at the same time, there's a lot of superstars, Korean superstars, K-pop stars and so forth that don't get military exemption. So obviously anyone that gets military exemption always gets measured against that. And that's why, it was such a detailed case with Ruler, who was in the 2023 Asian Games. If you guys remember, that was the roster with Chovy, Faker, and Kanavi, Ruler, Keria, and Zeus. And that was, a roster built by Koma, who was under very hot fire because, obviously everyone's very excited and very involved in the conversation of wanting their favorite players to go because it's such a big deal. Looking back at that roster, you could see clearly that the criteria was just like, who is the best performing player in the position right now? Because Kanavi and Ruler came from 2023 JDG at the time, who at the time were just the best team in the world. Chovy was performing out of his mind in the mid lane, Faker with the leadership, and then Zeus and Keria were amazing as individual players. They were just easily contesting for the best at the time out of Korea, of course. So that roster was very plain and simple. No one argued against it. And then as they went over to Asian Games, it's almost as if the tournament was less interesting due to, of course, nature of how broken the roster was. And fast forward now to 2026, we have our Korean national team for 2026, Zeus, Canyon, Faker, Zeka, Gumayusi, and Keria. The strangest thing about this, right, I think the biggest part of this conversation was in the criteria selection. They seem to have looked and cited results over the last 2 years. So they're looking at 2024, 2025, and 2026. We don't know exactly what the cutoff point is for this year in particular. But I think the biggest part of what's so strange is the selection of the criteria. So first and foremost, back in 23, I mentioned already, you had 2 players there that played in the LPL. So you didn't need to actually play, for example, the KeSPA Cup in order to qualify. So Viper chose to go, like this is such a big deal for players and teams that they actually choose to play in Korea or play in LPL if they have chances to be a part of Asian Games. They choose rosters based on that. A big conversation point was Viper moving back to the LCK to get a chance at Asian Games, getting cooked by Ruler, and then now for this year, KeSPA Cup being a very important part of the nomination makes Viper also be cut out of the loop, which is rough for the guy, rough for the poor Viper. They decided through detailed individual metrics, which is very weird. I feel like statistics in League of Legends are very good to give you insight on players, but I think it's more of like a book cover. You need to look into the details of why it is that way, and stats can be deceptive, they can be deceptive in both ways, in the sense that players can be better than their stats show, and they can be worse than their stats show. But great stats should be like a signal for you to look into as to why they are performing so good in certain metrics, but never a deciding factor. Also very strange that international tournaments such as MSI, First Stand, and EWC were not included. World Championship and KeSPA Cup and regional leagues were included. So very strange to cut out MSI, because MSI would strictly be cut out just for the purpose of isolating GENG players, because GENG dominated that tournament, and HLE dominated the First Stand. If we just isolate, of course, Viper was the one who dominated First Stand. EWC understandable that it's not included. It's a goofy tournament. It's not like 100% competitively sound. But removing MSI from the conversation is very strange. Now looking at the actual roster, Genji Arnold obviously made a point. He wanted to, stand up for Kiin. It's his player, one of his franchise players. I think it makes sense to stand up and talk about him. I think he made some good points about why the metrics were silly and stupid, which I agree with. I don't think it was an attack on Zeus. The irony of this post is that the same conversation you can replace, Kiin with Oner for jungle. Because Canyon, obviously, in my opinion, doesn't belong here as the jungler. I feel like Canyon's inclusion here was put in with the purpose of just pleasing the masses and not giving ammunition to the crowd that would say that this is so zofgk, biased. Because if we go off of recent form, I think Kanavi is the best performing jungler. But at the same time, you don't know if you're in a world where the cutoff point was earlier, because obviously HLE's win split was complete ass. I think that Faker you can make arguments for. I think there are better performing mid laners, BDD and Chovy. Chovy chose not to participate because he had a hip injury and he wants time to rest or something. He just decided not to participate. So Faker still, you can argue for his leadership. This is a team that is being put together. Faker's experience in leadership can be very helpful, I think, in any setting, especially when a team has limited time to work. I think having Faker as a presence just makes sense, regardless of his performance. It's not like he's that horrible that he's going to bring the team down. There's just better mid laners than him. So Faker, you can easily argue. Zeka in his current form, that's why it's weird, right? If you look at Zeka, his Worlds performances weren't super exciting. He had some good summer splits, right, where he won summer split. But here Zeka, if Zeka is being chosen off of current form, then it doesn't, the criteria is just weird. It's inconsistent, right? If Zeka's chosen off of current form, then what are we doing? Because if you look over his last 2 years, his results haven't been that great. And BDD is a clear better choice than Zeka. BDD went to World Finals with non-existent players. BDD is basically the Inspire of the LCK in the sense that he's a career maker. Players that play with BDD will never ever reach the same highs anywhere else, besides outside of maybe Kiin in the recent years. Aiming's best results are with BDD, Perfect, Peter, Diokdam, all these guys, they're not going to ever achieve the same highs as BDD. BDD is a kingmaker in a way tougher league. And then obviously Canyon has had a pretty mediocre last 2 years. The last time he peaked was 2024 MSI when he played Kartus and Kha'Zix and all that jazz. It's been quite some time, Canyon's been the weakest performer on the Gen G roster. And I think if you look at Oner's last 2 years, he's been insanely consistent. Insanely high level. I think Oner is a better choice. And I think even Tarzan is a better choice. I could go so far to make arguments like Tarzan versus Oner. That's a very interesting conversation, right? I think Tarzan has been an absolute demon. Gumayusi's recent form in his Worlds run, I think if you isolate the last 6 months, Gumayusi has been absolutely phenomenal. Keria is an easy choice. I think Gumayusi, Viper, Ruler are all sound choices. I think that Gumayusi currently, in this moment, in the LCK is the best performing ADC, and his Worlds run was fantastic. So Gumayusi and the Keria duo, putting them together for experience also makes sense. In the past, the Korean national team couldn't send 3 players from the same team, and now they have flexibility, right? Because some of the OGs from zofgk are on different rosters. But I think the one that sticks out as a sore thumb is, of course, Canyon. And then Kiin, I think, for top lane, and if you just look at the last 2 years, if you want to fit it into the criteria, if it's better into some of these criteria, if you just look at the last 2 years of performance. If you want to make the argument that Zeus is going to be better in the bin, and he's better for the meta, I think that's fine. But the lack of consistency in the setup is what is so weird. The messaging and there's no consistency over the choices is very strange, and it just seems like some players are chosen for the wrong reasons. And this year's Asian Games is going to be a lot more interesting because I think we might be in a situation where the Chinese team might be better. And before, it wasn't the case. But this year, it might actually just be better. if we have a situation where the Chinese national team for Asian Games is Bin, Shun, Knight, Gala, Vampire, I think that you are in for a hard time. I think that the Chinese team is going to be a lot better. I think Shun and Knight are going to just murder. So I actually think the Chinese team is going to be better, and I think that the KeSPA Association, KeSPA is going to regret some of their choices here. So it's going to be very, very rough. I think it's going to be tough for them. They didn't want to make it obvious that the zofgk roster was going to be sent, and then they decided to cut off like one of the more deserving players, which is crazy, because currently I think the main argument that you could do is imagine you set up a situation where you have Zeus, Oner, Zeka, Kiin, Gumayusi, Keria, or there's like players that are outside that don't get enough attention, so they just get ignored. You can make a super team of those players that are not like appreciated enough. Think about the players in their positions: Kiin, Tarzan, BDD, and Viper. This is like 4 really underappreciated players that are really, really insane. And then Keria, there's nobody that can come close to Keria, so there's no conversation there. But it's going to be interesting to see what kind of a roster they're going to send to the ENC. What kind of roster are they going to send to the ENC? Because obviously Asia Games is a lot more important, and if they think if they want to have consistency over the choices, then because the ENC submission period is exactly the same, so we'll see what kind of roster will be sent to the ENC as well. But I think there's a big chance that the Korea actually loses at Asian Games this year, which would be a bigger tragedy and a bigger controversy than anything else. So pay attention to it. And I agree with Genji Arnold's overall arching point. Obviously, he has a focus on his own player, and I understand that angle. He's defending his own player. Yeah, like as a CEO of your organization, you should do that, right? It's good PR, whatever. But I also understand the angle that the metrics are very silly, because I would use those metrics to push out Canyon from this conversation.